Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. You specifically mention wanting to move past just the numbers in personal finance.
Yeah, it's interesting how often our past, even if it doesn't seem related to money, can really shape our financial outlook.
So let's unpack that a bit. Housel uses this fascinating example of a tech millionaire who always carried around like wads of cash,
Oh, yeah.
almost like a security blanket. Most people would find that excessive.
Right.
But for him, it was rooted in his background and it gave him this sense of comfort.
Exactly. And it highlights this concept of everyone having like a unique financial map,
All
right?
right.
Someone who lived through something like hyperinflation might be terrified of bonds. They might view them as incredibly risky. But then someone who, let's say, rode the stock market boom in their 20s might be overly optimistic about future returns,
Right, even if the market conditions are totally different.
even if they're totally different. And we all have these, like, invisible scripts playing out.
So how do we avoid misinterpreting others' financial decisions or even our own?
Yeah, I think it's about remembering that there's not always one right way to manage your money. Instead of judging someone's choices, try to understand, like, what experiences might be shaping those choices.
That makes sense. It's almost like these financial experiences, they become this lens that we then view all our decisions through.
Precisely. And this leads into another big theme that Housel explores, which is the role of luck and risk. It's really easy to look at success and attribute it solely to skill, but, you know, ignoring the influence of chance can lead us to make some pretty bad decisions.
He brings up Bill Gates as an example, right?
Yes, he does. Bill Gates' success is undeniable. However, it's partly because he attended one of the only schools with a computer terminal back in the 1960s. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right.
It doesn't diminish his hard work,
Of course not.
but it shows how one stroke of luck can change everything.
So while you shouldn't discount hard work, sometimes being in the right place at the right time matters. It shouldn't discourage you, but maybe make you more open to new opportunities.
Absolutely. It emphasizes embracing those chance encounters, seeking out new experiences, being open to those possibilities. Now, obviously, we can't control those lucky breaks, right? And we also shouldn't beat ourselves up over every single setback. Failure is often a part of the journey, and sometimes it's due to factors beyond our control.
You can't control the cards you're dealt, but you can control how you play them, right? But how do we reconcile this idea of luck with, learning from others' success? If so much depends on chance, why even bother studying those who've done well?
That's a great question. While we can't replicate someone's path exactly because of those chance elements, there's still a lot of value in identifying those patterns of success and failure. So instead of trying to copy someone's lucky break, look for trends, look for principles that hold true across different situations.
Don't focus on the outliers, but look for those trends.
Exactly. And just as we shouldn't overemphasize luck and success, we should also acknowledge the role of risk in failure.
Right.
Just because someone didn't achieve a certain goal doesn't mean that their approach was wrong. They might have just encountered a risk that they couldn't have predicted.
So it's about understanding that both success and failure have deeper roots than what we might see on the surface. We should celebrate the wins, of course, but also learn from the losses, not judge.
Well said. Speaking of learning and growth, are you ready to dive into a concept that sometimes gets overlooked because it's considered, too basic?
Okay, you've got me intrigued. What is it?
Compounding.
Compounding. Honestly, it always kind of sounded a bit, I don't know, boring. Isn't that just personal finance 101?
It is, but its impact is far from boring.
Hmm.
Think of it this way. The real magic of investing is not necessarily about discovering the next hot stock. It's about consistently earning pretty good returns over a really long period.
Okay, so it's like Aesop's fable, the tortoise and the hare, but with money.
I love that analogy. It perfectly illustrates how we overestimate what we can achieve quickly, and we just completely undervalue the remarkable results of just consistent effort over time. And Housel illustrates this with Warren Buffett.
Because even though he's considered an investment genius, a huge chunk of his wealth was actually built after he turned 50, right?
Precisely.
Hmm.
Buffett understood the power of letting your investments just grow over time. Housel even calculated that if Buffett had started investing later, his net worth would be dramatically different. It's a powerful reminder that when it comes to building wealth, Patience and discipline are often more important than, trying to time the market or chasing the next big thing.
Slow and steady wins the race. It's almost like we get so caught up in these stories of overnight success that we forget that real financial stability is usually built gradually.
You're exactly right. And that leads perfectly into another crucial point. While having a plan is essential, it's equally important to be prepared for things to not go according to plan.
Right, because life throws curveballs, the market takes unexpected turns, it's all part of the game.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of having a margin of safety comes in.
Okay, break that down for me. What does margin of safety actually mean in this context?
Housel uses a great example of blackjack card counters.
Okay.
These are players who track cards to gain an edge. But here's the thing. Even with the odds in their favor, smart card counters never wager all their chips on a single hand. They build in this cushion for the unexpected.
Because even if they're right about the odds, there's always a chance, however small, that they could be wrong.
Exactly. They know they can't predict every single card, so they manage their bets in a way that allows them to stay in the game, even if they lose a few hands. That's their margin of safety.
It's like that poker saying, don't go broke trying to win a hand. You've got to stay in the game to come out ahead in the long run.
Yes, it's about preserving your ability to keep playing, to stay in the game long enough for your strategy to actually work. And this idea, it goes way beyond just gambling or investing. It's relevant for career choices, for relationships, for your health, pretty much every aspect of life.
It's about recognizing that uncertainty is a given, but we can build in these buffers to help us weather those unexpected events.
Precisely. And remember, those buffers, they don't have to be purely financial. They can be emotional, mental, or even social.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you're heavily invested in the stock market. A financial buffer would be like having a solid emergency fund.
Right.
That way, if an unexpected expense pops up, you're not forced to sell your investments, potentially at a loss. But just as crucial is that emotional buffer.
What would that look like?
That could be having so much confidence in your financial plan that even when the market takes a dip, you don't panic. You don't make any rash decisions. You have the mental fortitude to ride out the storm because you've accepted that volatility is just part of the game.
And a social buffer could be.
That could be having a supportive network of friends or family that you can turn to for advice if you're feeling stuck on a financial decision. Sometimes talking it out with someone you trust can provide some really valuable perspective.
So it's about building a life that can withstand those shocks. It's about resilience.
Beautifully said. And that leads us to another crucial insight from Housel. He argues that when it comes to our money, it's often better to be reasonable than strictly rational.
I love that. Because we're human, we're not robots. We can't always be expected to make the perfectly optimal decision just based on spreadsheets and algorithms.
Exactly. And that's something that I think a lot of people really struggle with. They get so caught up in finding that mathematically perfect financial plan that they overlook the importance of, their own emotions and well-being.
Right. Sometimes it's about making the choice that lets you sleep well at night, even if it means sacrificing a tiny percentage point of return.
Precisely. And that leads perfectly into the next concept we'll be discussing. Are you ready to keep going?
Absolutely. This is already making me rethink some things. All right. You mentioned a new concept. What is it?
It's about how our deeply ingrained beliefs, like what we consider good or bad, can sometimes really trip us up. Housel tells this story about Julius Wagner-Jauregg. He was a doctor who won a Nobel Prize.
Okay, a Nobel Prize. I got to hear this. What did he discover?
So back in the early 1900s, Wagner-Jauregg was studying syphilis,
Oh, wow.
a very serious disease back then. And he noticed that patients who had high fevers, their syphilis symptoms, seemed to go into remission.
So he was thinking that maybe, inducing a fever could be a treatment for syphilis.
Exactly. Now, this was radical, right? Because back then, fevers were seen as, the enemy. But he was determined to test his theory.
This is where the story gets really interesting, I bet.
It does. He started intentionally giving his patients fevers. And you know how he did it? Malaria.
He gave them malaria on purpose. That sounds incredibly risky.
It was. And tragically, some patients died. But a lot of them saw huge improvements. And it eventually led to the development of penicillin, which was a way safer and more effective treatment.
So this unconventional, risky approach actually kind of paved the way for one of the biggest medical breakthroughs. What's the takeaway here when it comes to our finances?
It's about challenging those assumptions, even when they seem totally obvious, like how back then people were terrified of fevers, even though they could be beneficial. We do the same thing with our finances. We might cling to outdated beliefs. We might let our fear make decisions for us, even when there's evidence pointing us in a different direction.
We need to be willing to kind of go beyond that initial gut reaction and really examine the facts.
Yes, be open to new ideas, even if they challenge what you thought you knew. You never know, you might discover amazing opportunities.
That actually reminds me of another point Housel makes about investing. He says it's better to be reasonable than rational, right?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And he gives this example of a study where they found that this very specific leveraged investment strategy, while totally sound on paper, would be a disaster for people emotionally.
Emotionally.
Yeah, because who wants to watch their life savings get wiped out, even if they know they will recover eventually?
You're right. It's not just about the numbers. It's about being able to sleep at night, being comfortable with the level of risk you're taking. Sometimes that means making a decision that just feels right, even if it's not perfectly optimized according to like a spreadsheet.
Exactly. And this brings up another important point, risk,
Mm.
and how bad we are at understanding it.
I'm guessing we're not great at it.
We are terrible at it. We overestimate it. We underestimate it. It all depends on our mood, what we've been through,
Right?
even just how the information is presented to us. Housel says one of the best ways to handle risk is to create room for error in our plans.
That sounds similar to the margin of safety idea we talked about earlier, that cushion.
You got it. But room for error, it goes beyond just what we can predict. It's about those things we can't even imagine might happen. The unknown unknowns.
I love the example he uses. He talks about the German tanks in World War II.
Oh yeah, those tanks.
They were so advanced, but were taken out by something totally unexpected. Field mice.
Exactly. They chewed through the wiring. You can plan for the risks you can see coming, but it's those ones you don't even think about that can really get you.
So how do we protect ourselves from those unknown unknowns?
Diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Makes sense. Spread the risk. If one area goes bad, you're not completely sunk.
Right. And that goes for your investments, what you do for a living, even your friends. The more you spread things out, the less likely one random event is going to ruin everything. It's about building a life that can handle surprises.
That is a good reminder. Speaking of uncertainty, what about our desire for things? Like wanting to keep up with the Joneses, how does that play into our financial decisions?
It's a huge factor. It's more than just wanting what your neighbor has. Housel argues that we often buy things not for their actual value, but for the message it sends to other people.
Like with luxury cars, right? It's not always about the car itself, but what having that car says about you.
Exactly. Designer clothes, fancy watches, these elaborate trips, they often become a way to show off our wealth and success.
It's like we're all trying to impress an invisible audience, but then are we making choices that actually align with what we care about?
That's the danger of that whole keeping up appearances thing. You end up spending too much on things you may not even really care about, all for show.
So how do we break free from that? How do we define wealth in a way that actually matters to us?
Housel talks about invisible wealth. It's about the things you don't buy, the trips you don't take. It's about having freedom and options.
So true wealth is not about what you spend, but how much you could spend if you wanted to but choose not to.
Exactly. Financial security, flexibility, being able to chase your passions, take risks, or even just say no to things you don't want to do, that's real freedom.
Now that's a definition of wealth that makes sense. It's about aligning your spending with your values, not some external pressure.
Right on. Which leads to another point, saving money.
It does seem like saving gets a bad rap, like it's restrictive or boring.
But as we've been talking about, it can be empowering. It's about so much more than just the money. It's about control over your time and your choices.
I love that saying. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy freedom, and that's pretty close.
Right. That freedom and control allow you to pursue those passions, take risks, and build a life that is fulfilling. To illustrate this, Housel talks about how he always thought he wanted to be an investment banker.
Because it meant making a lot of money.
Exactly. He even got what he thought was his dream internship at a prestigious firm.
But I have a feeling it wasn't what he expected.
You're right. It was all-consuming. Long hours, no personal time. That high salary came with a high price tag.
So the high income had hidden costs.
Exactly. He left the internship. The money wasn't worth it. He learned that true wealth wasn't about a big paycheck. It was about having control over his time and his life.
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Sometimes those things we think will make us happy can end up making us miserable, especially if they clash with our values.
It's about finding that balance between financial security and a life that feels meaningful.
Exactly. Speaking of aligning your finances with your values, there's another point Housel makes that I think you'll find interesting.
You mentioned another point about aligning finances with values. What did you have in mind?
Housel and his wife, they prioritize financial independence above everything else. It's really the lens through which they make their financial decisions.
So it's about having the freedom to do what they want when they want
Well,
without worrying about money.
exactly. And that drives all their choices, even if it goes against, typical financial advice. Like
Right.
they paid off their mortgage early.
Even though they probably could have earned a higher return investing that money elsewhere.
Right. But they chose peace of mind, that freedom.
Sometimes those emotional dividends are worth more than a few extra bucks, right?
Absolutely. It reminds us that personal finance is, well, personal. There's no right answer for everyone. It's about figuring out your values, what you want to achieve, and how much risk you can handle, then making choices that fit.
That really resonates with me. It's not always about the biggest payoff on paper, but about what brings peace of mind and aligns with your life. Now, I want to shift gears a bit. We've been focusing on individual psychology, but Housel also talks about history and how it shapes our views on money. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, he argues that understanding history, especially financial history, can be incredibly insightful. Like, he points to the post-World War II era in America as a key example.
That was a boom time, right?
It was. The war ended, soldiers came home, there's this surge in spending, people wanted to buy homes, cars, all those things they'd put off.
Sounds like a recipe for economic growth.
It was. And this was amplified by the rise of consumer credit. People could borrow more easily, which further fueled the expansion. But here's the interesting part. During this time, income inequality actually decreased.
So it wasn't just growth, it was growth that was more evenly distributed.
Exactly. And this is where the whole American dream narrative really took hold. The idea that anyone, no matter where they came from, could achieve financial success through hard work.
But that era couldn't last forever, right?
Right. The 1970s brought some challenges.
Right.
Inflation, recession. And this is where it gets really interesting psychologically, because even though the economic landscape was changing, people were still holding on to those post-war expectations.
So there was this disconnect between what they expected and what was actually happening.
Exactly. People were clinging to that American dream, even as income inequality started to rise again, and wages didn't keep up with the cost of living.
I can see how that would lead to some tension.
Housel suggests this disconnect has fueled a lot of social and political unrest, even in recent decades.
You see it in movements like Occupy Wall Street, even the Tea Party, right? While they come from different sides, they both tap into this sense of economic anxiety.
Absolutely. They both, in their own way, express this feeling that the system is rigged, that the American dream is slipping away. And this anxiety has only grown with globalization, technology changing so fast, and all the uncertainty we face today.
So where do we go from here? How do we bridge that gap between expectation and reality?
That's the million-dollar question. Housel doesn't offer any easy answers, but he emphasizes that understanding the psychology of money, both as individuals and as a society, is crucial.
It's about recognizing those hidden forces that shape our choices. Then we can start making more informed decisions, both for ourselves and for a better future.
Exactly. It's about having those honest conversations about money and creating systems that are fairer for everyone. Because at the end of the day, money is about more than just the numbers. It's tied to our emotions, our beliefs, our history.
The psychology of money really makes you think about those connections. It encourages you to question assumptions, to align your money with your values.
It does. And on that note, I'll leave you with this. Imagine waking up tomorrow having inherited a small fortune. What would you change in your life? What would stay the same? Think about what that says about your priorities and what truly matters to you.
That's a great question to consider. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you've gained some new insights into personal finance and how to build a life that's both prosperous and fulfilling.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring the fascinating psychology of money.